The discharge papers felt heavier than they should. Garrett Wade sat in the gray plastic chair outside the VA counselor's office, turning the manila folder over in his hands. 8 months of rehabilitation condensed into 14 pages of medical jargon and administrative checkboxes. 8 months trying to piece together what was left after the IED blast tore through his patrol in Helmand Province. 8 months learning to walk again without screaming when his left leg touched the ground. 8 months of nights where the explosion replayed behind his closed eyelids until he stopped trying to sleep at all. The counselor's door opened. Linda Martinez had kind eyes and the patient voice of someone who had seen too many broken soldiers pass through her office. She held out a second envelope, this one thicker, brown with age at the edges. "This came for you 2 weeks ago," she said, "from an estate lawyer in Montana. We held it until you were cleared for discharge." Garrett took it. The return address meant nothing to him. Billings, Montana. He had never been to Montana. The name on the letterhead was Samuel Cross, attorney at law. "You have family there?" Linda asked. "Had family," Garrett said, past tense. Inside were documents he did not expect. A property deed. A death certificate dated 2 years prior. Rose Eleanor Wade, age 76, cause of death acute myocardial infarction. His grandmother. The woman he had not seen since he was 14 years old, the day the state came to take him and his brother away. There was a handwritten note paperclipped to the deed. The handwriting was shaky but precise, the letters formed with the careful attention of someone who chose words sparingly. "Mr. Wade, I was your grandmother's attorney for 40 years. She left instructions that you be notified upon your military discharge. The property is yours, 240 acres outside Whitefish. She wanted you to have it. There are things there she hoped you would find. Samuel Cross." 240 acres. Garrett read the deed 3 times. Land he had never seen, inherited from a woman who had vanished from his life when he needed her most. The property description meant nothing to him. Coordinates, township markers, a notation that read includes all structures, improvements, and contents therein. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost did not answer. Then something made him press the green button. "Mr. Wade," a man's voice, smooth and confident. "This is Derek Hollies with Titan Core Mining Corporation. I'm calling about the property you've inherited in Montana." "How did you get this number?" "Public record, Mr. Wade. Estate transfers are filed with the county. We monitor properties in regions where we operate. It's standard business practice." Garrett said nothing, waited. His drill instructor's voice echoed in his memory. "Let them talk. Silence makes people uncomfortable. Uncomfortable people make mistakes." The voice on the phone continued. "We understand you've just been discharged from the VA. Transitioning back to civilian life is difficult. You're going to need resources, stability. We'd like to make you an offer on the Montana property. $18,000. Cash. The transaction could be completed within 5 business days." $18,000 for 240 acres. Garrett had no idea what land in Montana was worth, but the eagerness in the man's voice told him everything he needed to know. Someone wanted this property badly enough to call within days of the estate transfer, badly enough to track down a veteran in a Denver VA hospital. "I haven't seen the property yet," Garrett said. A pause, brief but noticeable. "Of course. Take your time, Mr. Wade. But I should mention that our offer is time-sensitive. Market conditions change. It would be unfortunate if you traveled all that way only to find the property isn't what you hoped." "I'll think about it," Garrett said, and ended the call. Linda was watching him from her desk. "Everything okay?" "Someone wants to buy land I just inherited. Offered $18,000 before I even knew the place existed." Her expression shifted. That's either very generous or very suspicious. Garrett looked at the deed again. Rose Alina Wade. The name brought back fragments of memory. A cabin that smelled like wood smoke and coffee. Strong hands lifting him onto a workbench. The sound of metal striking metal, rhythmic and hypnotic. A woman's voice singing something he could no longer remember the words to. When he was 6, maybe 7, before his parents died, before the accident that killed them both and left him and Danny alone, before the state decided that a 70-year-old woman was too old, too poor, too sick to raise 2 grieving boys. "I need to see it," he said. Linda nodded slowly. "You have somewhere to stay once you're discharged." He shook his head. "Then I'd say Montana is as good a place as any to figure out what comes next." The Greyhound station in Denver smelled like diesel fuel and desperation. Garrett bought a one-way ticket to Missoula with money he did not have to spare. The bus left at 6 in the evening, scheduled to arrive 14 hours later. He found a seat in the back and pressed his forehead against the window as the city lights faded into darkness. Somewhere in Wyoming, his phone buzzed again. A text message from a number he knew by heart even though he had not called it in 4 years. "Danny. The Millers want to move up the adoption, 3 weeks instead of 5. They say it's better to finalize before the school year ends. I'm scared, Garrett. Something feels wrong." Garrett's chest tightened. Danny was 11 now. The last time Garrett had seen him in person, his brother had been 7 years old, small for his age, with dark hair that fell into his eyes and a habit of chewing his thumbnail when he was nervous. 4 years of separation. 4 years of phone calls that grew shorter and less frequent. 4 years of Garrett deployed overseas while Danny moved through foster homes in Wyoming. The Millers were supposed to be good people, ranchers outside Casper, stable income, nice house, everything the social workers looked for. But something in Danny's message made Garrett's instincts prickle. The same instincts that had kept him alive in Helmand when every street corner could hide an IED. He typed back, "Hold on, I'm figuring something out, 2 more weeks. Can you hold on for 2 more weeks?" The reply came fast, "Okay, I trust you." 3 words that hit harder than shrapnel. The bus rolled through the night. Garrett did not sleep. He watched the landscape change outside the window. Mountains rising in the distance, their peaks white with snow that never melted. Forests thick and dark. Rivers that cut through stone like the earth itself was still being carved. This was a different kind of country than the deserts he had patrolled overseas. Older, colder, unforgiving in a way that had nothing to do with bullets or bombs. They reached Missoula just after 8 in the morning. Garrett stepped off the bus into air so cold it burned his lungs. November in Montana. The sky was the color of steel. He stood in the parking lot with his duffel bag and no plan beyond the address written on Samuel Cross's letterhead. Whitefish was another 90 miles north. The bus did not go there. He would have to hitchhike. A semi-truck idled at the far end of the lot. The driver was checking his tires, a man in his 60s with a weathered face and a Vietnam veteran's cap pulled low. Garrett walked over. "You heading north?" The driver looked up, took in Garrett's short hair, his slight limp, the duffel bag with Marine Corps insignia still visible despite years of wear. "Kid, where you trying to get to?" "Whitefish." "That's my route. Load lumber up there twice a week, climb in." They drove in silence for the first 20 miles. The truck cab was warm, the heater blasting. Country music played low on the radio. Then the driver spoke. "You serve?" "Marines, 4 years, just got out." The driver nodded. "I did 2 tours in Nam, 68 and 70. Came back to Montana and swore I'd never leave again. 46 years I kept that promise." He glanced at Garrett's leg. IED. Yeah. They'll tell you it gets easier. That's half true. The leg might heal. The rest of it, that stays with you. But Montana's a good place to carry weight. Land doesn't judge, just asks you to respect it. More silence. Then the driver asked, "What's in Whitefish for you?" Inherited some property. Never seen it. Never even knew it existed until 3 days ago. The driver's expression shifted. Something flickered across his face. Recognition, maybe, or concern. What's the property? 240 acres. Belonged to my grandmother, Rose Wade. The truck slowed slightly. The driver's hands tightened on the wheel. You're Rose's grandson. You knew her. Kid, everyone in 3 counties knew Rose Wade. Best farrier in Montana. Made horseshoes for my ranch for 20 years. When she died, half of Whitefish showed up for the funeral. The driver's voice softened. She talked about you. About your brother. Every damn time I saw her, she'd ask if I'd heard anything about her grandsons. Followed your deployments online. Lit candles at the church every Sunday when you were overseas. Garrett stared out the window. His throat felt tight. Why didn't she write? Why didn't she visit? The driver was quiet for a long moment. Then he said Rose tried. Spent every penny she had fighting the state. Lost every time. Court said she was too old, too sick, too poor. Said you boys would be better off in the system. He shook his head. They were wrong about that. Did she die alone? The driver's jaw worked. Found her in the forge 3 days after her heart gave out. Still holding a hammer. Whatever she was working on it right up to the end. The mountains grew closer. Whitefish appeared as a scatter of buildings nestled in a valley, surrounded by peaks that looked like they could crush the town without effort. Population 7,000. Main Street with a feed store, a diner, a Veterans of Foreign Wars hall with an American flag snapping in the wind. The driver pulled over in front of a small brick building. Sign out front read Holloway Ranch Supply. This is where you want to start. Frank Holloway. He and your grandma were friends for 40 years. He'll take you to the property. Garrett climbed down from the cab. Thank you. The driver leaned out the window. One more thing. About a week before Rose died, she came by my place. Asked me to deliver a message if I ever met her grandson. He paused. She said tell him I never stopped fighting. Tell him I left him the tools he'd need. Tell him I'm sorry I couldn't be there, but I'm still watching. The truck pulled away. Garrett stood on the sidewalk, watching it disappear around a corner. Inside Holloway Ranch Supply, the air smelled like leather and mineral oil. Shelves lined with horse tack, feed supplements, tools worn smooth from years of use. A man stood behind the counter, early 70s at least, with hands like iron and eyes the color of river stone. He looked up, froze mid-motion, mouth half open. Jesus Christ, he said softly, you're Jack Wade's boy. Garrett blinked. My father. The man came around the counter slowly as if approaching something fragile. You look just like him. Same eyes, same way of standing. He extended his hand. Frank Holloway, I knew your dad. Knew your grandma Rose even better. The handshake was firm, calloused. Frank's eyes were wet at the edges. You came back, he said. Rose said you would. I didn't believe her. Thought you'd sell the property sight unseen and never set foot in Montana. He wiped his eyes roughly. Glad I was wrong. I need to see it, Garrett said. Frank nodded, locked the shop without a word. They climbed into a battered Ford F-250 that looked older than Garrett. The truck started on the third try. They drove 15 miles up a dirt road that wound through pine forest so thick the daylight barely penetrated. Snow dusted the ground in patches. The temperature dropped with every mile of elevation gained. Frank spoke as he drove. Rose built that forge in 1970. Your grandfather helped her, but it was her vision. She could read metal like some people read books, knew exactly what temperature, what hammer strike, what timing every piece needed. Ranchers came from 3 states to get their horses shod by Rose Wade. What happened to my grandfather? Died before you were born. Heart attack in the barn. Rose found him. Nearly killed her too, but she kept going, kept the forge running, kept the homestead alive. The road narrowed to 2 ruts through tall grass. Then it opened into a clearing. Garrett's breath caught. The homestead sat at the base of a mountain, sheltered by pines on 3 sides. A log cabin, old but solid, with a stone chimney rising from the center. A barn tilting slightly to the left, its red paint faded to rust. And at the far end of the clearing, a building made of river stone and corrugated metal. The forge. Frank parked the truck. They sat in silence. Last time I was here was the day we found her, Frank said quietly. 3 days after she died. Door to the forge was open. She'd been working. Hammer was still on the anvil. Whatever she was making, she never got to finish it. He looked at Garrett. She left everything to you. The land, the buildings, whatever she had inside. Said you'd know what to do with it when you were ready. They climbed out. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe. Garrett walked to the cabin first. The door was unlocked. Inside, dust covered everything in a thin gray film. Furniture draped with sheets. A kitchen table with 2 chairs. A wood stove cold and empty. He moved through the room slowly. Living area with a couch worn soft from decades of use. Bedroom with a quilt folded at the foot of the bed. Bathroom with a sink stained from hard water. Photographs lined the walls. Rose as a young woman, strong and smiling, holding an enormous hammer. A wedding photo. Rose and a man who must have been Garrett's grandfather. Another photo, more recent, showed a young couple with a baby. Garrett's parents. His father holding infant Garrett while his mother laughed at something off camera. And then photos that made Garrett's chest ache. His own boot camp graduation photo. Marine dress blues, 18 years old, trying to look tough. Rose had this. She had been watching. She had known. Next to it, a series of school photos. Danny at 5, missing his front teeth. Danny at 7, serious and unsmiling. Danny at 9, hair falling into his eyes the way it always did. She never stopped watching, Frank said from the doorway. Got every photo she could. Printed them out, put them up. This was her family wall. She'd sit here with her coffee every morning and talk to you boys like you were right there with her. Garrett's hands shook. He shoved them in his pockets. The barn was full of tools. Saws, axes, splitting mauls. A workbench with a vise. Horse tack hanging from nails. Everything organized with the precision of someone who knew exactly where each item belonged. Then they walked to the forge. The building was smaller than the cabin but built like a fortress. Stone walls 3 feet thick. Metal roof sloped to shed snow. Heavy wooden door with iron hinges that Rose had clearly forged herself. Frank pushed the door open. It swung smoothly, well-oiled. Inside, the forge was a temple to metalwork. The hearth stood in the center, a massive stone structure with a chimney rising through the roof. The anvil sat beside it, 300 pounds of steel worn smooth on top from decades of hammer strikes. Tools hung on the walls in perfect order. Hammers of every size and weight. Tongs with jaws shaped for different metals. Chisels, punches, fullers, hardies. But there was more. Equipment that did not belong in a 19th century blacksmith shop. A modern welding station, metallurgy testing gear, a microscope on a side table, chemistry equipment, beakers and burners and jars of compounds Garrett did not recognize. Notebooks were stacked on a workbench, dozens of them, binders with dates written on the spines. 1990 through 2022. Frank stayed by the door. This is where I leave you. Some things a man needs to discover on his own. You're not coming in. Rose made me promise. If you ever came back, I was to show you the property and then let you explore alone. Said you'd find what you needed to find. Frank looked at him with eyes full of something Garrett could not name. Regret, maybe, or hope. She loved you, he said, both of you, more than anything. When they took you away, it broke something in her. But she never stopped fighting, never stopped believing you'd come home. He walked back to his truck. Garrett heard the engine start, heard the tires crunch on gravel as Frank drove away. Alone, Garrett moved through the forge slowly. He touched the anvil. The surface was cold, pitted with decades of use. He picked up a hammer. The handle was worn smooth, shaped by Rose's hands. On the workbench he found a journal. Leather cover, edges frayed. He opened it. Rose's handwriting filled the pages. Notes about metalwork, temperatures, chemical compositions, but also personal entries. Dates, thoughts, fragments of a life lived alone. November 12, 2018. Garrett deployed to Syria, saw it on the news, lit a candle at St. Matthew's, prayed harder than I've prayed in years. Please God, bring my boy home safe. April 3, 2020. Danny turned 9 today, tried to call the foster home. They wouldn't let me speak to him, said it would disrupt his adjustment. Adjustment to what? To forgetting he has a grandmother who loves him. June 22, 2021. Finished the extraction trials. Process works. 94% purity. Jack would have been proud. This could change everything. But who do I tell? Who would believe an old woman working alone in a forge? Garrett's vision blurred. He set the journal down before the tears could fall on the pages. He walked the perimeter of the forge, looking for he did not know what, just looking. His boot caught on something. A board shifted under his weight. He crouched down. The floorboard was loose, deliberately so. He pried it up. Beneath was a steel handle flush with the stone foundation. A hatch. Garrett's heart rate picked up. He pulled the handle. It resisted, rusted in place. He pulled harder. Metal groaned. Then it gave. Cool air rose from below. The smell of earth and concrete and something else. Electricity. Stone steps descended into darkness. Garrett pulled out his phone, turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the black, illuminating rough stone walls. He climbed down. 15 steps, then his feet hit concrete. The room was bigger than the forge above. 20 by 30 feet at least. Concrete floor, stone walls reinforced with steel beams, and it was full. Shelves lined every wall, floor to ceiling, holding glass jars, each jar labeled in Rose's handwriting. Metal samples, compounds, test results, hundreds of them organized by date and composition. A long metal table dominated the center of the room. More equipment. A furnace, electric and propane hybrid, vented through a hidden chimney. Testing gear, scales precise to the milligram, spectrometers, tools Garrett did not recognize. And maps. The walls were covered with geological survey maps of the surrounding mountains, topographical details, mineral deposit markers, red X's scattered across the landscape like bullet holes. Garrett turned in a slow circle, trying to comprehend what he was seeing. This was not a blacksmith's workspace. This was a laboratory. This was research conducted over years, maybe decades. In the far corner sat a metal safe. Heavy-duty combination lock. Garrett approached it slowly. He tried random numbers, nothing. Then he tried his birthday. Wrong, Danny's birthday. The lock clicked. The handle turned. Inside, the safe held treasures that had nothing to do with money. Cash, $7,800 in $100 bills, bundled with rubber bands. A gold ring, simple thin band worn smooth, Rose's wedding ring. A stack of envelopes, 84 of them, each one sealed, stamped but never mailed, addresses written in Rose's hand, half addressed to Garrett in care of various VA hospitals, half addressed to Danny in care of foster homes across Wyoming. 84 letters she had written and never sent. A leather journal different from the one upstairs, this one thicker, bound with string. Property deeds, survey documents, legal papers Garrett did not have time to read. And at the bottom, a letter, 18 pages, handwritten on both sides. The first page began with words that made Garrett's hands shake. My dearest Garrett, if you are reading this, it means I ran out of time. I need you to know the truth about why your father died and what I have spent 20 years building to make sure his death meant something. Garrett sank onto the cold concrete floor, his back against the cold stone wall. He began to read. The letter took him 4 hours to finish. He read sections twice, 3 times, trying to make sense of words that rearranged everything he thought he knew about his family. Rose wrote about partnership with Garrett's father, how in 2001 they discovered rare earth element deposits in the mountains surrounding the Wade property, how Jack, trained as a geologist, understood the significance, how these elements were critical for technology, for military equipment, for the future of American manufacturing. She wrote about developing a revolutionary extraction process. Traditional mining destroyed landscapes, used toxic chemicals, left scars that lasted generations. But Jack had an idea. Use traditional blacksmith techniques, forge temperatures and metallurgy knowledge refined over centuries, combined with modern chemistry. Extract the rare earth elements cleanly, economically, sustainably. For 4 years they worked in secret. Rose built this underground laboratory. Jack provided geological expertise. By 2004 they had succeeded. Small-scale production, 94% purity, minimal environmental impact. Jack filed a preliminary patent application. Then in February 2005, Jack's truck went off Black Bear Ridge, 60 feet down a ravine. The sheriff ruled it an accident, icy roads, driver error. Rose wrote about her suspicions, about how Jack's truck was maintained like clockwork, about how he knew those roads better than his own driveway, about the brake lines in the police photographs that looked wrong. She wrote about Titan Core Mining Corporation, how they had been buying up mineral rights in area aggressively, how Jack's patent application disappeared from federal records, how the geologist who worked with Jack was fired, moved to Alaska, won't talk. She wrote about bankruptcy, about fighting for custody of Garrett and Danny and losing, about courts that decided an old woman with no money and no health was unfit to raise 2 traumatized boys. I spent your inheritance on lawyers, she wrote, lost every case, lost my grandsons, lost everything except this land and what I could build on it. For 17 years, Rose continued the work alone, perfected the extraction process, mapped the deposits, documented everything with scientific precision. The rare earth elements under Wade property and the surrounding federal land were worth over $200 million. But it was never about the money, she wrote. It was about proving that your father died for something real, something important, something worth fighting for. I could not raise you, Garrett. The state took that from me. But I could leave you the weapon to destroy the people who killed your father and tore our family apart. This property is not just land. It is evidence. It is justice. And it is your future. The letter ended with instructions, coordinates for the richest deposits, names of people Rose trusted, legal contacts, and a final message. Do not sell to Titan Core. Make them pay for what they did. Get Danny back. Build the life your father wanted you to have. I love you. I have always loved you, and I will love you long after I am gone. Your grandmother, Rose Alina Wade. Garrett sat in the darkness of the underground room for a long time after he finished reading. The concrete floor was cold beneath him. The air smelled like earth and old stone and secrets kept for decades. His father had been murdered. His grandmother had spent 20 years fighting alone. And he had been overseas, half a world away, bleeding in the sand while she died holding a hammer in an empty forge. The rage came slowly, not the hot flash of combat anger but something colder, deeper, the kind of anger that burned without flame. He climbed back up the stone steps. The forge above was dark now, late afternoon fading into evening. Shadows stretched across the floor. Garrett walked to the anvil, placed both hands on the cold steel. His father had stood here, had worked beside Rose, planning a future that never came. His phone buzzed. Unknown number again, he answered. Mr. Wade, this is Derek Hollies. We spoke yesterday about the property. I wanted to follow up on our offer. 18,000 is very generous for land that remote. I hope you will consider it seriously. Garrett's voice was flat. I have considered it. The answer is no. A pause, then the voice shifted, less smooth now, more direct. Mr. Wade, you are a discharged veteran with PTSD living in a condemned cabin with no utilities. You have no income and no prospects. Be smart. Take the money. My father died on this land, Garrett said. My grandmother spent her life protecting it. And you think I will sell it for $18,000 to the people who killed him? Silence on the other end, heavy and cold. I do not know what you think you know, the voice said finally, but I would be very careful about making accusations you cannot prove. I have all the proof I need. Garrett, the voice said, and the use of his first name was deliberate, calculated. Your father made a choice. Your grandmother made a choice. Both of them paid a price. You should learn from their mistakes. The call ended. Garrett stood alone in the forge as darkness fell. Through the window, he could see mountains rising against the sky, his grandmother's land, his father's grave, his inheritance written in iron and stone, and 2 decades of silent work. He picked up a hammer from the wall, the same one Rose had been holding when she died. The handle was smooth, shaped by years of her grip. He carried it to the anvil. In the corner stood bags of coal for the hearth. Garrett loaded the forge, struck a match. The coal caught slowly, then with growing heat. Orange light filled the room. He found Rose's metallurgy journal on the workbench. Opened to the first page of her extraction process. Notes written in careful detail. Temperatures, compounds, timing. A lifetime of work condensed into pages that smelled like smoke and time. The forge heated. The room grew warm. Garrett removed his jacket. He had come to Montana with nothing. No plan, no hope, no idea what he was looking for. Now he stood in a forge his grandmother built, reading notes about technology that could change an industry, holding a hammer still warm from her hands. Outside, night settled over the mountains. Stars appeared, brighter than any Garrett had seen. The kind of stars you could navigate by, the kind that had guided people home for thousands of years. He thought about Danny, 3 weeks from being adopted by people connected to the corporation that killed their father. Thought about Rose, dying alone, still working, still fighting. Thought about all the years he had believed he was abandoned, when the truth was someone had been watching over him every single day. The forge fire burned steady and hot. Garrett picked up the hammer, felt its weight, its balance. The same tool used to forge horseshoes and freedom and futures. Okay, Grandma, he said to the empty room. to the walls that held her secrets, to the earth that kept her promises. Let's finish what you started. The hammer rang against the anvil, once, twice. The sound echoed through the forge, through the clearing, through the mountains beyond. The sound of iron, remembering what it was made for. The sound of a fight beginning. Garrett woke on the floor of the underground laboratory. His neck ached from sleeping against the stone wall. Gray morning light filtered down the stairwell. For a moment he forgot where he was. Then memory returned like cold water. Montana. The forge. Rose's letter still clutched in his hands. He climbed the stairs slowly, his left leg stiff from the concrete floor. The forge building above was freezing. His breath made clouds in the air. Through the window he could see frost covering everything, the world painted silver and white. The cabin had a wood stove but no wood. Garrett walked to the barn, found an axe and a pile of rounds that needed splitting. He worked for an hour, letting the physical labor warm his blood. Swing, split, stack. Swing, split, stack. The rhythm was meditative. The same motion repeated until his shoulders burned and sweat soaked through his shirt despite the cold. Inside the cabin, he built a fire, fed it kindling and split pine until flames caught and held. Warmth slowly filled the small space. He found coffee in a cupboard, 2 years old but sealed in a can. Made a pot on the wood stove. Drank it black and bitter, standing at the window, watching the sun rise over mountains that looked like they had been carved from the sky itself. The 84 letters sat on the kitchen table where he had brought them up from the underground room. 84 envelopes, each one addressed in Rose's careful handwriting. Each one sealed with the hope that someday, somehow, it would reach him. He opened them in chronological order. The first was dated March 2015. Garrett had been 19, freshly deployed to Afghanistan. The envelope contained 3 pages of lined paper, the kind torn from a spiral notebook. Rose's handwriting was steady here, strong. My dearest Garrett, I do not know if you will ever read this. The courts say I cannot write to you. They say contact would disrupt your life, interfere with your placement. But I am writing anyway because some things must be said even if no one hears them. You deployed last week. I saw it on the Marine Corps website. 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines, Helmand Province. I looked it up on a map. It is so far away, farther than I can imagine, and I am so afraid for you. I lit a candle at St. Matthew's Church. Prayed like I have not prayed since your grandfather died. Please God, bring my boy home safe. Please let him know that someone here loves him. Someone here is waiting. I wish I could tell you about your father, about how proud he would be. Jack wanted to serve too, did you know that? Talked about the Marines when he was 18, but he had a scholarship for geology and his mother convinced him to take it. He always wondered what his life would have been like if he had chosen differently. Now his son chose for him, and I am proud and terrified in equal measure. Come home safe, Garrett. Come home and I will tell you everything. All the things I should have said years ago, all the truths you deserve to know. I love you. I will always love you. Grandma Rose. Garrett set the letter down, picked up the next one. June 2015. Rose wrote about the forge, about a difficult commission, a rancher who wanted custom gate hinges that could support 300 pounds, about how she stayed up 2 nights perfecting the curve and the strength, about how when she finished, she thought of Garrett, thought about how metalwork was like life. You heated things until they were soft enough to shape. Then you hammered them into something stronger than they were before. September 2015. Danny had started 2nd grade. Rose had somehow gotten a photo from the school. She described it in detail. His hair longer than she remembered. His smile shy, like he was not sure he was allowed to be happy. She wrote about wanting to frame the photo but being afraid to look at it too often because the ache of missing him was physical, like hunger, like cold. like broken bones that never quite healed. The letters continued, month after month, year after year. Rose tracked Garrett's service through news reports and military family forums. When his unit saw combat near Marja, she wrote about the 3 days she could not sleep, about sitting in the forge at night, working metal just to keep her hands busy while she waited for casualty lists to be published. She wrote about Danny's struggles in school, about a foster placement that ended badly, about a social worker who told Rose that Danny asked about her, asked why his grandmother never visited, asked if she had forgotten him. "I could never forget," Rose wrote, "not if I lived 1,000 years, but how do I tell him the truth, that I tried, that I spent everything I had fighting to keep you both, that I lost." January 2018. Rose wrote about her health, about the chest pains that came and went, about the doctor who said her heart was giving out, 68 years of hard work catching up to her all at once, about refusing treatment because treatment meant hospitals and hospitals meant bills and bills meant losing the forge. "I will not die in a hospital," she wrote. "I will die here, on this land, doing the work I love. And maybe that is a better ending than most people get." April 2019. Garrett had been injured. Rose did not know details, only that he was in a military hospital in Germany. She wrote 7 pages, front and back, rambling and desperate. Fragments of prayer mixed with memories of him as a child. The time he split his chin open on the barn door and she drove him to the hospital, holding a towel to his face while he cried. The time he helped her shoe a nervous horse, talking to the animal in a soft voice until it calmed. Small moments that she had held on to like precious stones. "Please live," she wrote. "Please survive. I cannot bury another person I love. I cannot stand at another grave and wonder what I could have done differently." The letters blurred together. Garrett read them all, one after another, while the sun climbed higher and the fire in the stove burned down to coals. His coffee went cold. His hands shook. The last letter was dated June 2022, 4 months before Rose died. "Garrett, I am so tired. Not just physically, though my body aches in ways I cannot describe. Tired of fighting. Tired of losing. Tired of waking up every morning in an empty house and remembering that I drove away the only family I had left. The doctor says it will not be long now. Months maybe. Weeks if I am unlucky, but I am not afraid of dying. I am only afraid of dying before you come home, before I can tell you the truth, before I can look you in the eye and say I am sorry. I am so, so sorry. I built something for you and Danny, something that might give you a future I could never provide. It is hidden where only you will find it. And when you do, I hope you will understand that everything I did because I loved you. I loved you when you were born. I loved you when they took you away. I loved you every day you were overseas, and I will love you long after I am gone. That is the only truth that matters. Come home, Garrett. Come home and finish what your father started. Come home and be the man I always knew you would be. I love you. Grandma Rose." Garrett sat at the kitchen table with 84 letters spread before him like evidence of a life lived in the margins, a life spent watching from a distance, loving from exile. He had spent 12 years believing he was abandoned, 12 years telling himself he did not need anyone, 12 years building walls around everything soft inside him because soft things got hurt and he was done being hurt. All of it was a lie. She had been there. Every deployment, every injury, every lonely Christmas in a group home or a barracks overseas. She had been watching, documenting, loving him in the only way the system would allow. The rage that had been simmering since he read her confession letter ignited into something white-hot. Not rage at Rose, rage at the people who made her die alone, At the courts that decided love was not enough. At the corporation that killed his father and then tried to erase the evidence. At himself for not coming home sooner. He gathered the letters carefully, stacked them in order, carried them down to the underground laboratory and locked them in the safe with everything else Rose had hidden there. Then he walked to Frank Holloway's ranch. The drive took 20 minutes. The ranch sat in a valley carved by a creek that ran clear and cold even in November. Cattle grazed in distant pastures. Horses stood near a barn that looked like it had been there since Montana was a territory. Frank was mending fence when Garrett found him. The old man worked slowly, methodically, wrapping wire with pliers worn smooth from decades of use. He looked up as Garrett approached. "Read the letters?" Frank asked. "All of them." Frank set down his tools. "Come on, there is something I need to show you." They walked to the barn. Inside, Frank unlocked a metal cabinet bolted to the wall, pulled out a wooden box, plain and unvarnished, set it on a workbench. "Rose gave me this 10 years ago," Frank said. "Made me promise to keep it unless you came back asking questions." He opened the lid. Inside were photographs, printouts on regular paper, faded at the edges but clear enough. Photos of a truck at the bottom of a ravine, a blue Ford Ranger crumpled against pine trees, emergency vehicles, lights flashing, sheriff's deputies standing in the snow. Frank spread the photos across the workbench. "These are from the day your father died, February 19th, 2005. I took them before the wrecker hauled the truck away." He pointed to one photo in particular, a close-up of the truck's undercarriage. The brake lines were visible, clearly severed, not worn through, not rusted, cut. Frank's voice was quiet. "I was there, following Jack in my own truck because we were both heading to the same cattle auction in Kalispell. Saw his truck swerve, saw it go over the edge. I stopped, climbed down to help." He pointed to another photo. "That is where I found him." Jack had been thrown partially through the windshield. Blood on his face, chest crushed against the steering wheel. "Was he alive?" Garrett asked. His voice sounded far away. For a few minutes, Frank's hands trembled slightly. He looked at me, said, "Tell Rose," said, "Break lines," said, "They cut them." Then he said, "Protect the boys." Those were his last words, "Protect the boys." Garrett stared at the photos, at the evidence of murder documented in fading ink on printer paper. "Why did you not tell the sheriff?" Frank's jaw worked. "I was 48 years old with 3 kids and a mortgage. Titancore had already bought up half the county. The sheriff's cousin worked for them. The county prosecutor's brother-in-law was on their payroll." He looked at Garrett with eyes full of shame. "I was a coward. I told the sheriff I arrived after the crash, said I did not see anything. Let them rule it an accident." He pulled out another item from the box, a small cassette recorder, the kind people used before smartphones. 2 years later, I tracked down the geologist who worked with your father, guy named Tom Herrera. He had moved to Alaska, would not talk on the phone, but I flew up there, bought him enough whiskey to loosen his tongue, recorded the conversation. Frank pressed play. The recording was scratched, distant voices through decades of magnetic tape degradation, but the words were clear enough. A man's voice, slurred with drink. "Jack Wade was brilliant. Best geologist I ever worked with. Found rare earth deposits worth hundreds of millions. Developed a clean extraction method that could have changed the industry. Filed a patent application in December 2004. Frank's voice on the tape. "What happened?" "Week after he filed, Titancore approached him. Wanted to buy the patent and the mineral rights for pennies on the dollar. Jack refused. Said the technology should benefit the public, not corporate shareholders. said he was going to license it to the federal government for national security purposes. What did Titancore do? The geologist's voice dropped. They made it clear Jack had two choices: sell or disappear. He chose neither. 3 weeks later, his truck went off Black Bear Ridge. Brake failure, they said. I quit the next day. Moved my family as far from Montana as I could get. Why did you not go to the police? A bitter laugh. With what evidence? Against a company that owns half the state. They would bury me the same way they buried Jack. I had a wife, 2 daughters. I was not going to make them orphans for a fight I could not win. The recording ended. Frank clicked off the player. Garrett stood very still. The barn smelled like hay and leather and old wood. Outside, cattle lowed softly. Normal ranch sounds. The kind of peaceful Montana day that his father never got to see again. Rose knew all this, Garrett asked. She suspected from the beginning. I gave her these photos and the recording 2 years after Jack died. She used them to file a wrongful death lawsuit. Lost. Judge said there was insufficient evidence of foul play. Said the photos could be interpreted multiple ways. Said the recording was hearsay. Frank's voice turned hard. Titancore had lawyers who made the evidence disappear, made witnesses disappear, made the whole thing go away like it never happened, and Rose lost everything trying to fight them. Her savings, her health, her grandsons. Did she ever forgive you for not testifying? Frank looked at him. She never blamed me, said I had a family to protect, said she understood, but I never forgave myself. He closed the box. That is why I am telling you now. I am 72 years old. My kids are grown. I have got nothing left to lose, and I owe Rose the truth finally coming out. Garrett picked up the box. The weight of it was insignificant. The weight of what it contained was crushing. I need to make a call, he said. That evening, Garrett stood in the forge with his phone pressed to his ear. Danny answered on the second ring. Garrett, his brother's voice was small, scared. Hey, buddy, how are you holding up? A pause, then words tumbling out fast. The Millers are asking weird questions about Grandma Rose, about what she was working on, about the forge. They keep saying it's just curiosity, but it feels wrong, like they are looking for something. Garrett's grip tightened on the phone. What kind of questions? Whether she talked about mineral deposits, whether she left any research, whether anyone else knows about her work. Danny's voice cracked. Garrett, I am scared. They are nice to me, but something is off. Like they are being nice because they want something. Do they know I am in Montana? Silence. Then I think so. They asked yesterday if I had heard from you, if you were planning to sell the property. I said I did not know. Garrett looked around the forge, at Rose's tools hanging on the walls, at the anvil where his father and grandmother had worked side by side, at the hearth cold and dark. Listen to me, Danny. I need you to hold on for 2 more weeks. Can you do that? What is happening? I am figuring it out, but I need you to be careful. Do not tell the Millers anything about our conversations. Do not tell them what I am doing. And if anything feels dangerous, you call 911. Understood? Okay, Danny's voice was steadier now. I trust you, Garrett. After they hung up, Garrett sat in the growing darkness. The temperature was dropping fast. His breath made clouds. He pulled out the business card Derek Hollies had given him. Titancore Mining Corporation, Regional Acquisitions. He searched the name online. Derek Hollies reported to Victor Brennan, Chief Operating Officer. Garrett searched that name, found a corporate biography. MIT graduate, 20 years in mining, board member for 3 industry associations. Photos showed a man in his mid-40s, expensive suit, confident smile. Then Garrett searched for Robert Miller, Wyoming rancher, land acquisitions. The results made his blood run cold. Robert Miller, Regional Land Manager, Titan Core Mining Corporation, based in Casper, Wyoming, responsible for securing mineral rights and property access across the Rocky Mountain region. The Millers were not just ranchers, they worked for Titan Core. Garrett called the social worker handling Danny's case, left a message, called the county foster care office, left another message, called a lawyer whose name Samuel Cross had included in Rose's documents, left a third message. No one called back. He walked to the cabin as full darkness fell. No lights except stars overhead, more stars than existed anywhere else on Earth. The Milky Way stretched across the sky like a river of light. Inside, he built up the fire, made another pot of coffee, sat at Rose's kitchen table and opened her metallurgy journal. The process she had developed was elegant in its simplicity. Traditional forge temperatures to heat specific compounds, chemical separation using non-toxic agents, crystallization techniques refined over thousands of trials, every step documented with scientific precision. Garrett read late into the night. He had welding training from the Marines, understood heat treatment, metallurgy basics, how different metals responded to temperature. But this was beyond anything he had learned in the service. This was art and science fused together, the kind of knowledge built over decades of daily practice. Rose had been more than a blacksmith. She had been a researcher, an innovator, a woman who saw possibilities no one else could see. Near midnight, headlights swept across the cabin windows. Garrett stood, alert. His hand moved instinctively to his hip where he had carried a sidearm for 4 years. Found nothing. He was a civilian now. The vehicle stopped in front of the cabin. A black Mercedes SUV, luxury model, completely out of place on a dirt road in rural Montana. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out, well-dressed, polished shoes that would be ruined by the mud. He walked to the cabin door and knocked. Garrett opened it. The man smiled. Professional, calculated. "Mr. Wade, I apologize for the late visit. I am Victor Brennan, Chief Operating Officer for Titan Core Mining. I was hoping we could talk." Garrett did not move from the doorway. About what? About a mutually beneficial arrangement. Brennan looked past him into the cabin. "May I come in? It is quite cold out here." "No." Brennan's smile did not waver. "Very well, I will be direct. We know you inherited this property from Rose Wade. We know she was working on rare earth extraction methodology. We know she documented mineral deposits in these mountains." He paused. "We are prepared to make you a very generous offer." "I am not selling." $25,000, cash. The transaction can be finalized this week. "Not selling." Brennan's expression shifted slightly, the professional mask slipping. "Mr. Wade, you are a disabled veteran with PTSD. You have no income, no permanent residence, no prospects. You are living in a cabin with no heat, no running water, no electricity. Courts will never grant you custody of your brother under these circumstances." He stepped closer. "Be smart, take the money, start a real life. Your grandmother spent 20 years fighting us and died alone in that forge. Do not make the same mistake." Garrett looked at him, really looked, saw past the expensive suit and rehearsed speech, saw a man used to getting what he wanted, a man who had never been told no by someone he could not intimidate or buy off. "My father thought he was brave too," Garrett said quietly. Brennan's words from the phone call. How did that turn out for him? Something flickered in Brennan's eyes. Calculation, assessment. He took a step back. "I see Rose told you stories. You should be careful about believing everything a bitter old woman wrote. People see conspiracies where none exist. Your father's death was investigated thoroughly, ruled an accident. He spread his hands. Tragic, but these things happen on mountain roads in winter. My father's brake lines were cut. Brennan was silent for a long moment. Then he said, very carefully, "That is a serious allegation. I hope you have evidence to support it." "I have photographs. I have testimony. I have a recording of your company threatening my father 3 weeks before he died." Brennan's professional smile returned, but it was colder now. "Then I suppose you will take that evidence to the authorities. Good luck with that, Mr. Wade. Small-town sheriffs are very accommodating to major employers in their counties." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, one more thing. Your brother Danny seems happy with the Millers. It would be a shame if his adoption was delayed by unnecessary legal complications." The threat was clear: back off or lose Danny. Garrett stood in the doorway until the Merceds disappeared down the dirt road. Then he went inside and locked the door. But he did not sleep. Instead, he walked to the forge through darkness, lit the coal, watched the fire catch and grow. Heat filled the space slowly. He pulled out a length of iron stock, heated it until it glowed orange, took it to the anvil and began to hammer. He did not know what he was making, did not care. He just needed to hit something, needed to feel metal yield under force, needed to create something in a world that seemed bent on destruction. Swing, impact, sparks. The rhythm was ancient, the same rhythm blacksmiths had followed for thousands of years, turning raw material into tools, into weapons, into whatever was needed to survive. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, Garrett realized he had forged a knife blade, rough, unfinished, but the shape was there. He quenched it in the slack tub. Steam rose in clouds. He held the blade up to the firelight, examined the metal, not perfect, not even good, but it was his, made with his hands, proof that he could take something formless and give it purpose. Outside, the first hint of dawn touched the eastern sky, gray light bleeding into black. Garrett banked the forge fire, walked back to the cabin, sat at the kitchen table and looked at the evidence spread before him: photos of his father's murder, recordings of threats, letters from a grandmother who fought alone for 20 years, and a knife blade cooling on the table, still warm to the touch, still carrying the heat of creation. He picked up his phone, started making a list. People Rose trusted, according to her notes: Samuel Cross, the lawyer; Frank Holloway, who finally told the truth; a geology professor at Montana Tech named James Whitmore; a journalist in Billings named Sarah Chen, who had been investigating Titan Core for years; and someone else. A name Rose had circled in her journal: Pastor Mike Sullivan, Whitefish Community Church, Navy veteran, combat action ribbon. Garrett had been to war. He knew what a combat action ribbon meant. It meant Pastor Sullivan had faced fire and not run. He needed people like that now, people who understood that some fights were worth the cost. The sun rose over the mountains. Light spilled across the valley, painting everything gold. A new day in Montana, the first day of the rest of Garrett's war. He thought about Danny, scared and alone with people who were using him as leverage. Thought about Rose, dying in this forge, still holding a hammer because she would not surrender. Thought about his father's last words: "Protect the boys." Garrett stood. His leg ached from a night without sleep. His hands were blistered from the hammer, but he felt more awake than he had in months. He walked to the forge one more time, looked at the anvil, at the tools hanging on the walls, at the hearth where fire had burned for 50 years. "Okay," he said to the empty room, to the ghost of a woman who never gave up, to the memory of a father he barely remembered, to the future he was going to build from the wreckage of the past. "Let's go to war." Dawn came cold and sharp. Garrett stood in the forge with Rose's metallurgy journal open on the workbench, studying diagrams that looked more like art than science. Temperature curves, chemical compositions, crystallization patterns. His grandmother had documented everything with the precision of someone who knew her work would outlive her. He started small, a single test batch following her notes exactly. Heat the ore sample to 1400 degrees Fahrenheit. Maintain temperature for 40 minutes. Introduce the catalyst compound slowly, watching for the color change from orange to pale green. Let it cool naturally over 6 hours. The waiting was the hardest part. The forge fire brought back Afghanistan, the heat on his face like desert sun, the orange glow like tracer rounds in darkness. His hands shook the first time he loaded coal into the hearth, sweat that had nothing to do with temperature soaked through his shirt. But he forced himself to continue. Strike the match. Watch the coal catch. Feed it oxygen with the bellows until flames rose steady and hot. The roar of combustion filled his ears. For a moment he was back in the Humvee, the world exploding around him, metal tearing like paper. Then the moment passed. He was in Montana, in his grandmother's forge, doing work that mattered. Frank arrived mid-morning with coffee in a thermos and sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. Found Garrett staring at the forge fire like he was seeing ghosts in the flames. "First time is always the hardest," Frank said quietly. He did not ask what Garrett was seeing. Did not need to. He had fought his own war 50 years ago and still carried it. They ate in silence. Then Frank said Rose used to talk while she worked. Said the metal could hear intent. Said if you approached it with fear or anger it would break, but if you came with respect it would tell you what it needed. Garrett looked at the old man. "You believe that?" Frank shrugged. "I believe Rose never made a bad horseshoe in 50 years. And I believe she saw things in metal that other people could not see." He sipped his coffee. "Maybe it was skill. Maybe it was something else. Does it matter?" By afternoon, Garrett had produced his first rare earth element sample. Small, barely a tablespoon of pale powder. He tested it according to Rose's protocols. Checked purity with the spectrometer she had hidden in the underground lab. 94% pure neodymium, exactly what her notes said the process would produce. He called Dr. James Whitmore at Montana Tech. The geology professor answered on the third ring, voice cautious. "Dr. Whitmore, my name is Garrett Wade. Rose Wade was my grandmother. I have something you need to see." 24 hours later, Whitmore stood in the underground laboratory with the kind of expression scientists get when their theories prove true. He had spent 6 hours examining Rose's geological surveys. Another 2 reviewing her extraction methodology. Now he held the neodymium sample up to the light. "This is extraordinary," he said. His voice carried the weight of academic authority. "Your grandmother self-taught herself advanced geology and metallurgy over 30 years. This survey work is professional grade. The extraction process is revolutionary." He set down the sample carefully. "Rare earth elements are critical for national defense, electric motors for jets and submarines, guidance systems for missiles, batteries for everything. America imports 80% from China. We are dependent on a strategic rival for materials essential to our military. The deposit under your property, combined with Rose's clean extraction method, could change that equation completely. This is not just valuable. This is a matter of national security." Garrett absorbed the words. "Can you validate it officially? Put your name and the university's reputation behind it?" Whitmore nodded slowly. "Yes, and I know people at the Department of Defense who will be very interested in this. But you need to understand what you are stepping into. If this technology is real, powerful entities will want it. Some will want to buy it. Others will want to bury it. I know, Garrett said. They already killed my father for it. Whitmore was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I served in the Army Corps of Engineers for 6 years. Iraq, 2 deployments. When I got out, I swore I would only work on projects that helped people. This qualifies. He extended his hand. I am in. Sarah Chen arrived from Billings the next morning. She was a journalist who looked more like a corporate lawyer. Sharp suit, sharper eyes, carrying 2 decades of investigative experience in the set of her shoulders. Frank had made the introduction, said Rose trusted Sarah, said she had been digging into Titancore for 3 years. She sat at Garrett's kitchen table with a laptop and a recording device. Tell me everything. Garrett talked for 2 hours, showed her the letters, the photos of his father's truck, the recording of the geologist's testimony, Rose's documentation of Titancore's harassment over 20 years. Sarah took notes without expression. When he finished, she closed her laptop. I have been tracking Titancore's land acquisitions across 4 states. Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, Idaho. Same pattern everywhere. They identify properties with mineral potential, make lowball offers. When owners refuse, bad things happen. Equipment failures, mysterious fires, accidents. How many accidents? Garrett asked. 7 that I can prove. Probably more I have not found yet. All ruled accidental. All involving people who owned land Titancore wanted. She looked at him. Your father fits the pattern perfectly. Can you publish it? Yes, but I need more sources, more documentation. Right now it is a conspiracy theory. I need to make it undeniable. Garrett handed her a thumb drive. Everything from Rose's files, every document, every note, every survey, make it undeniable. Sarah Chen smiled for the first time. This is Pulitzer-level work. Your grandmother was building a case against them for 20 years. She just needed someone to publish it. She stood. Give me 1 week. That Sunday, Garrett walked to Whitefish Community Church. Small white building with a steeple that caught the morning sun. Inside, the congregation was thin. 30 people maybe, most of them over 60. The kind of church that had seen better days. Pastor Mike Sullivan stood at the pulpit. Late 50s, with the bearing of someone who had commanded men in difficult circumstances. His sermon was about persistence, about fighting battles that seemed unwinnable, about faith that sometimes looked like stubbornness. After the service, Garrett waited while the congregation filed out. Then he approached the pastor. I need help, Garrett said. Pastor Sullivan studied him. You are Rose Wade's grandson. I have been expecting you. They talked in the pastor's office. Small room with a desk and 2 chairs and a wall full of photos. Sullivan in Navy uniform. Sullivan with his platoon. Sullivan receiving a medal from an admiral whose face Garrett recognized but could not place. Rose helped my family when my wife was sick, Sullivan said. Brought meals every week for 6 months. Helped with medical bills we could not afford. Never asked for anything in return. He leaned back. So when Frank called and said you needed support, the answer was yes before he finished asking. I am going up against a corporation that killed my father. They have lawyers and money and connections in every county office. I need people who are not afraid to fight. Sullivan smiled. Son, I served on the USS Nimitz during Operation Iraqi Freedom. Face down threats a lot scarier than corporate lawyers. What do you need? A community. People who will stand with me when Titancore tries to bury me. Sullivan picked up his phone, started making calls. By Wednesday, Garrett had 15 volunteers working on the homestead. Veterans from the VFW chapter. Members of the American Legion, men and women who had served in Vietnam and the Gulf War and Iraq and Afghanistan. They came with tools and trucks, and the kind of quiet competence that comes from years of getting things done under pressure. They fixed the cabin's plumbing, installed a water pump connected to the well, ran electrical lines from a generator Frank donated, repaired the barn roof, cut firewood and stacked it in cords that would last through winter. Pastor Sullivan organized it all with the efficiency of a military operation, assigned tasks, coordinated schedules, made sure everyone had what they needed. Garrett worked alongside them, hammering shingles, carrying lumber, welding broken hinges. The physical labor felt right, better than sitting alone in the forge reading his grandmother's notes, better than the nightmares that came when he tried to sleep. One of the volunteers was a woman named Carol Barnes, Army medic, 2-tour in Iraq. She had a prosthetic left leg and eyes that saw too much. She worked next to Garrett on the cabin repairs. "You have the look," she said. "What look?" "Someone who came back, but part of them is still over there." She hammered a nail with practiced precision. "It gets easier, not fast, but easier." "Does it?" "No," she looked at him, "but you learn to carry it better, and having something worth fighting for helps." That night the escalation began. A county building inspector showed up at 7 in the morning, said there had been complaints about unsafe structures, needed to examine the cabin and forge immediately. Garrett let him in, watched while the inspector walked through both buildings making notes. The man spent 30 seconds looking at structural elements, 5 minutes photographing everything. "I am sorry, Mr. Wade, but these buildings do not meet current code. The cabin lacks proper insulation and electrical work. The forge building has inadequate ventilation. I will need to post a condemnation notice pending repairs." "Who filed the complaint?" The inspector would not meet his eyes. Anonymous tip. After he left, Garrett called the county office, got transferred 3 times, finally reached someone who confirmed that the inspection had been requested by Titan Corps' legal department. Concern for public safety, they said. The next morning, Garrett went to check the well, found the water discolored, smelling like diesel fuel. Someone had dumped something into it overnight. No footprints in the mud around the wellhead. No tire tracks on the road. Professional work. Frank brought water from his ranch. Said he would install a new well pump with a lockable cover. Said this was exactly what Titan Corps did to other properties. Slow pressure. Make the land unusable. Force the owner to sell. That night, someone tried to burn down the forge. Garrett woke to the smell of smoke, ran outside in bare feet to find flames climbing the wooden door of the forge building. He grabbed a fire extinguisher from the cabin, sprayed foam until the fire died. The door was charred, but the building was intact. The stone walls had saved it. He found an empty gas can in the tree line. No fingerprints, no evidence except the professional way the accelerant had been applied. He called the sheriff. A deputy came out 6 hours later, took a report, said without witnesses or evidence there was not much they could do. Probably kids, the deputy said. You know how it is. The deputy's truck had a Titan Corps contractor sticker on the back window. By Friday, Sarah Chen's article hit the Billings Gazette. Front page above the fold. Headline read, "Corporate Giant's Shadow. Decades of Mysterious Deaths and Land Grabs in Montana Mining Country." The article laid out everything. 7 suspicious deaths over 15 years. Pattern of harassment against landowners. Titan Corps' aggressive acquisition strategy. Photos of Jack Wade's truck. Excerpts from the geologist's recording. Rose's documentation of threats and pressure. The response was immediate. Local news picked it up, then regional. By afternoon, it was on Montana Public Radio. By evening, CNN was calling Sarah for an interview. Titan Corps stock dropped 6% in one trading day. And the sheriff showed up at Garrett's property with a warrant. 5 deputies, 2 county vehicles, the sheriff himself, a man named Tom Brackens who had been in office for 16 years. They had a warrant to search for stolen geological survey equipment. Claimed Titancore had filed a complaint about proprietary data being taken from their archives. Garrett watched them tear through the cabin, empty drawers, scatter papers. They found the computer Rose had used, seized it. Found notebooks in the forge, took those too. They did not find the underground laboratory. Garrett had closed the hidden floor panel and stacked tools over it. The entrance was invisible unless you knew where to look. After they left, Garrett stood in the chaos of his ransacked home. Frank arrived within the hour, brought Pastor Sullivan and 3 other veterans. They did not find what they were looking for, Frank said. That means you still have leverage. Garrett's phone rang. Unknown number, he answered. A voice he did not recognize said, "Mr. Wade, this is Admiral Richard Thompson, United States Navy, retired. Pastor Sullivan asked me to call. I understand you have a national security matter that requires attention." Garrett sat down slowly. "Yes, sir." "I am listening." Garrett explained. The rare earth deposits, Rose's extraction technology, the murder of his father, Titancore's cover-up, Dr. Whitmore's validation, everything. The Admiral was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I served with Pastor Sullivan on the USS Nimitz. He saved my life during a fire in the engine room. I owe him a debt I can never repay." He paused. "I also sit on the advisory board for the Department of Defense's Critical Minerals Initiative. If what you are saying is accurate, this is exactly the kind of technology DoD has been trying to develop for a decade." "It is accurate, sir." "Then you will have federal investigators at your property within 72 hours. FBI for the criminal case. Department of Interior for the mineral deposits. DoD for the technology assessment. And Mr. Wade, once the federal government is involved, local sheriffs cannot touch you." "Thank you, sir." "Thank you for bringing this to our attention. Your grandmother did remarkable work. We will make sure it is not wasted." The FBI arrived on Monday. 2 agents in dark suits driving an unmarked sedan. They showed credentials, asked permission to examine the property. Garrett took them straight to the underground laboratory. The lead agent was a woman named Rebecca Hayes, 30 years in the Bureau, specialized in corporate fraud and racketeering. She spent 20 minutes in the underground room without speaking, just photographing, documenting, taking samples. When she came back up, her expression was grim. "Mr. Wade, what you have here is evidence of a potential RICO case. Racketeer-influenced and corrupt organizations. If we can prove Titancore engaged in a pattern of criminal activity to acquire properties, we can seize their assets and charge executives with conspiracy to commit murder." "How long will that take?" "Months, maybe years. But with this documentation we have a foundation." She looked at him. "Your grandmother knew what she was doing. She built a case prosecutors dream about." That afternoon, a Department of Interior geologist arrived. Spent 4 hours with Dr. Whitmore reviewing Rose's surveys. Confirmed the deposits. Estimated value at $250 million minimum. The DoD materials specialist came Wednesday. Examined Rose's extraction methodology. Ran tests on the neodymium sample Garrett had produced. Asked 100 technical questions. Then he sat at Garrett's kitchen table and said, "This process could change American rare earth production completely. Low environmental impact, high yield, scalable. The Department of Defense would like to discuss licensing this technology for national security applications." What does that mean? It means you would retain ownership, but we would pay you for the right to use Rose's methods to extract rare earth elements on federal land. It means funding, resources, protection. Protection from what? From corporations that want to bury this technology because it threatens their business model. The specialist leaned forward. Titan Core uses destructive mining techniques because they are cheap and they control the market. Your grandmother's method would undercut them completely. They will fight to stop it. Let them fight, Garrett said. That night Danny called. His voice was panicked. Garrett, they are trying to finalize the adoption tomorrow. Emergency hearing. The Miller's lawyer says I have behavioral issues that require immediate stable placement. It is a lie. They are just trying to get it done fast. Where are you now? At the Miller's house. They are watching me. I think they know you are causing problems for Titan Core. They keep asking if I have talked to you. Listen to me, Danny. Tomorrow morning, tell your social worker you do not feel safe. Tell her the Millers have been asking inappropriate questions. Tell her you want to be placed somewhere else. What if they do not believe me? They will, because federal agents are going to be at that hearing, and they are going to have questions about why a Titan Core land manager is trying to adopt the nephew of someone fighting the company. Danny's voice was small. Are you coming to get me? Yes, I promise. Hold on one more day. After the call, Garrett walked to the forge. The building smelled like smoke from the arson attempt. The door was charred black, but the anvil still stood. The hearth still held fire. He loaded coal, lit it, watched flames rise. Frank found him there an hour later, brought news. I did something I should have done 20 years ago, Frank said. His voice was steady. I contacted the FBI, gave them my testimony, told them I witnessed your father's murder, told them about his last words, told them everything. Frank's hands were shaking slightly. I was a coward once. Let fear keep me silent while good people suffered. I will not be a coward again. Garrett looked at the old man, at 7 decades of hard living etched into his face, at eyes that had seen too much and stayed quiet too long. Thank you, he said. Frank nodded. Your grandma would have done the same for me. Now it is my turn to stand up. The emergency adoption hearing was scheduled for 10 in the morning in a county courthouse in Casper, Wyoming. Garrett drove through the night, 5 hours across the Montana-Wyoming border, arrived as the sun rose over the plains. FBI agent Hayes was already there, along with a social worker from Child Protective Services, and Pastor Sullivan, who had driven separately. The Millers arrived with their lawyer. Robert Miller looked exactly like his corporate photo. Mid-50s, dressed like a rancher but moving like a businessman. His wife Patricia looked nervous. When the judge called the case, the Millers' lawyer stood. Your Honor, we request immediate finalization of the adoption of Danny Wade. The child has been in our care for 6 months and has shown behavioral issues that require the stability of permanent placement. Agent Hayes stood. Your Honor, the FBI respectfully requests this hearing be postponed. We are conducting an investigation into potential child exploitation related to this adoption. The judge's expression sharpened. What kind of exploitation? The prospective adoptive parents work for Titan Core Mining Corporation. The child's biological brother is currently in a legal dispute with that corporation over inherited property. We have reason to believe this adoption is being pursued to gain leverage in that dispute. The courtroom went silent. The judge looked at Robert Miller. Is this true? Are you employed by Titan Core? Miller's lawyer started to speak. The judge cut him off. I asked Mr. Miller. Yes, Your Honor. I work for Titan Core. But that has nothing to do with why we want to adopt Danny. Agent Hayes pulled out documents. Your Honor, Robert Miller is Regional Land Manager for Titan Corps. His job is to acquire property for mineral extraction. 3 weeks ago, Titan Corps attempted to purchase property from Danny's brother. When that failed, pressure tactics began. The timing of accelerating this adoption aligns precisely with the escalation of that dispute. The judge turned to Danny, who sat small and quiet in the front row. Young man, I would like to speak with you in my chambers. 20 minutes later, the judge returned. Her expression was granite. This adoption petition is denied. Mr. and Mrs. Miller, I find credible evidence of ulterior motives in your adoption request. Danny Wade will be immediately removed from your custody and placed in emergency foster care pending further investigation. She looked at Garrett. Mr. Wade, are you prepared to assume guardianship of your brother? Pastor Sullivan stood. Your Honor, if I may. Pastor Mike Sullivan, Whitefish Community Church, Navy veteran. I have known the Wade family for many years. Garrett Wade has stable housing and community support. I would be willing to provide temporary foster placement for Danny while Garrett completes the guardianship process. The judge nodded. Approved. Danny Wade is remanded to the temporary custody of Pastor Sullivan, effective immediately. Garrett met Danny outside the courthouse. His brother ran to him. They held each other for a long time. Danny was shaking. I knew you would come, Danny said. I knew it. They drove back to Montana together. Danny in the passenger seat watching the landscape change. Mountains rising, pine forests thickening, sky opening up. You are really going to keep me? Danny asked. Forever, Garrett said. What about the Millers? What about Titan Corps? They are done using you, and they are going to pay for what they did to our family. Danny was quiet for a while. Then he said, tell me about Grandma Rose. So Garrett did, told him about the forge, about the letters, about 20 years of work done in secret and silence, about a woman who never stopped fighting even when everyone said she should give up. They reached Whitefish after dark. Pastor Sullivan was waiting with his wife and 2 teenage sons, made up the guest room for Danny, made dinner, treated him like family because that was what Pastor Sullivan did. Garrett drove to the homestead alone, walked to the forge, stood in front of the anvil. Rose's hammer hung on the wall. He took it down, felt the weight, felt the smooth handle shaped by decades of her grip. Tomorrow, federal investigators would continue their work. Sarah Chen would publish follow-up articles. Dr. Whitmore would validate the technology to the Department of Defense. The machinery of justice would grind forward slowly. But tonight, Garrett had his brother back, had a community standing with him, had evidence that could not be buried, had a future built on Rose's foundation. He struck the hammer against the anvil. The ring echoed through the forge, through the clearing, through the mountains. The sound of iron accepting its purpose, the sound of war declared and battle joined. The sound of a family refusing to disappear. The federal courthouse in Missoula sat like a fortress at the edge of downtown. Gray stone and tall windows, the kind of building designed to remind people that justice was supposed to be permanent and unyielding. Garrett stood on the steps with Samuel Cross, the attorney who had handled Rose's estate and agreed to represent him in the custody hearing. The lawyer was 70 years old with hands that shook slightly when he shuffled papers, but his eyes were clear, and his voice carried the weight of 4 decades practicing law in Montana. This will not be easy, Samuel said. The state will argue you are unemployed, living in substandard housing, recently discharged from military service with documented PTSD. They will say Danny deserves stability you cannot provide. What do we have? The truth. Samuel looked at him. Sometimes that is enough. Inside, the courtroom smelled like old wood and floor wax. Danny sat in the front row between Pastor Sullivan and his wife. He wore clothes that were too new, bought specifically for this hearing. His dark hair was combed back. He looked small in the large courtroom, young and scared. Garrett caught his eye, nodded once. Danny's shoulders straightened slightly. The judge was Catherine Reyes, a woman in her early 60s with gray hair pulled back severe and reading glasses that made her look like she was perpetually examining something that disappointed her. She had been on the family court bench for 28 years, had seen every variation of human dysfunction and occasional grace that existed. "All rise," the bailiff said. Judge Reyes entered, sat, arranged papers on her bench with precise movements. Then she looked up. "We are here for emergency custody modification in the matter of Daniel Wade." She glanced at her notes. "Mr. Wade, you are seeking permanent guardianship of your 11-year-old brother. The state is recommending continued foster placement pending adoption by an appropriate family." She removed her glasses. "Counselors, make your arguments brief. I have read the filings." The state's attorney went first. A young woman who looked fresh out of law school, earnest and convinced she was protecting a child. "Your Honor, Garrett Wade is 22 years old. He was honorably discharged from the Marine Corps 8 months ago with a disability rating for PTSD and physical injuries. He has no employment. He is living in a rural cabin that was recently condemned by county inspectors. He has no experience raising children." She shuffled papers. "While we acknowledge his military service and appreciate his desire to care for his brother, the court must prioritize Danny's welfare. A stable 2-parent household with established income and community ties would better serve this child's needs." Samuel Cross stood slowly. His age showed in the movement, but his voice was steady. "Your Honor, my client is a decorated Marine Corps veteran who served 4 years including combat deployment. He inherited property from his grandmother valued at over $200 million in mineral deposits. He has documented technology worth millions more that is currently under evaluation by the Department of Defense. He has a community of supporters including veterans, church members, and local business owners." Samuel placed documents on the clerk's desk. "Garrett Wade is not some unemployed drifter. He is the heir to one of the most significant rare earth mineral deposits in the United States and the custodian of extraction technology that could change American energy independence." The state's attorney stood. "Your Honor, mineral deposits and theoretical technology do not provide day-to-day stability for an 11-year-old child." Judge Reyes held up a hand. "I will hear from the parties directly. Mr. Wade, approach." Garrett walked to the witness stand, raised his right hand, swore to tell the truth. The state's attorney asked questions designed to highlight his weaknesses. How long had he been out of the military? 8 months. What was his current employment? None. Where was he living? A cabin on family property. Had he completed the required parenting classes? Not yet, but enrolled. Then Samuel Cross stood for redirect. "Mr. Wade, why do you want custody of your brother?" Garrett looked at Danny. "Because he is my family, the only family I have left." "You served in Afghanistan. What did you do there?" "Infantry patrols, convoy security, got hit by an IED outside Marja, lost 3 men in my unit." He paused, "Spent 4 months learning to walk again." "What did you think about during that time?" "Getting home, getting my brother back, finishing what my grandmother started." "Tell the court about your grandmother." So Garrett did. Told them about Rose Wade, who built a forge and raised a family and fought a corporation alone for 20 years. About a woman who documented every birthday and deployment and small victory of grandsons she was forbidden to see. About 84 letters written and never sent because the system said contact would be disruptive. About a woman who died holding a hammer because she would not give up. My grandmother could not raise us, Garrett said. Courts decided she was too old, too sick, too poor. Maybe they were right about some of that, but they were wrong about what mattered. He looked at the judge. She never stopped loving us, never stopped fighting. She just ran out of time. Samuel placed a stack of envelopes on the evidence table. These are letters Rose Wade wrote to her grandsons over 7 years. Every month, documented their lives from a distance, proved her devotion even when she could not be present. The judge picked up one envelope, examined it, then another. Mr. Wade, the state argues you lack stability. What do you say to that? I say I have 240 acres of land that has been in my family for 50 years. I have a forge that still works. I have a community that showed up when I needed help. And I have a promise I made to my brother that I would come for him. He met the judge's eyes. That is more stability than either of us has had in 10 years. Judge Reyes set down the letters. Mr. Wade stepped down. I would like to speak with Daniel. Danny walked to the stand. He looked even smaller there. The bailiff brought a phone book for him to sit on so he could reach the microphone. Danny, the judge said gently, do you understand why you are here today? Yes, ma'am. Your brother wants to take care of you. Do you want that? Danny nodded, then remembered to speak. Yes, ma'am. Why? Because he is my brother. Danny's voice was quiet but steady. Because he came back for me like he promised. Because when I was scared, he called me every week even when he was in Afghanistan getting shot at. Because he is the only person who remembers our parents. The courtroom was silent. The Millers seemed like nice people, the judge said. Why did you not want to stay with them? Danny looked down, then back up. Because they did not want me. They wanted to use me to get to Garrett, to make him give up our grandmother's land. How do you know that? Because they told me. Danny's voice strengthened. They said if I behaved and did not cause trouble, they would let me see Garrett, but if I was difficult, they would make sure I never saw him again. He wiped his eyes. That is not family. Family does not make you choose. Judge Reyes leaned forward. What do you want, Danny? I want to live with my brother. I want to learn about the forge. I want to hear stories about our dad and our grandmother. I want to be with the only family I have left. His voice cracked, please. The judge was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, step down, Danny. She shuffled papers, looked at both attorneys, then at Garrett. I have been doing this job for 28 years. I have seen every kind of custody situation you can imagine. Parents who should not be allowed near their children. Foster families who genuinely care. Social workers who do their best with impossible caseloads. She removed her glasses, and I have learned that the law does not always know what is best for a child. Sometimes stability means a nice house and 2 parents and regular meals. Sometimes it means someone who will drive through the night to a courthouse in Wyoming because an 11-year-old boy is scared. She put her glasses back on. I am granting temporary guardianship to Garrett Wade, pending 6-month review. Conditions are as follows. Mr. Wade will complete parenting classes within 60 days, will maintain stable housing, will demonstrate income sufficient to provide for his brother's needs, will submit to monthly check-ins with a court-appointed social worker. She looked at Danny. Young man, if at any time you feel unsafe or unhappy, you tell the social worker. Understood? Yes, ma'am. The gavel came down. Court adjourned. Garrett stood frozen for a moment. Then Danny was there, arms around his waist, crying into his jacket. Pastor Sullivan and his wife approached, congratulating them. Samuel Cross shook Garrett's hand with a grip that was surprisingly firm. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. Sarah Chen from the Billings Gazette, camera crews from local news, someone from the Associated Press who had picked up the Titancore story. "Mr. Wade, do you have a statement?" Garrett looked at the cameras, at Danny standing beside him, at the courthouse behind them. "My grandmother spent 20 years building something she could not finish. She died believing she had failed." He paused. "She was wrong. Her work is going to change this industry. Her fight is going to expose corruption, and her grandsons are going home together. That is all I have to say." They drove back to Montana in Samuel Cross's truck. Danny fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted from the hearing. Garrett watched the mountains grow larger through the windshield. Samuel spoke quietly. "You know this is not over. Titancore will keep fighting. The FBI investigation will take months. The Department of Defense moves slowly. You will face more pressure." "I know." The old lawyer glanced at him. "Your grandmother hired me 40 years ago to handle her property deed. Simple transaction. Took an hour." He smiled slightly. "She came back every year after that. Sometimes with legal questions, usually just to talk. Told me about her grandsons, about the work she was doing, about the fights she was losing." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Rose Wade never gave up. Even when she lost every court case, even when she went bankrupt, even when the state took her grandsons, she kept fighting." Samuel's voice was firm. "She would be proud of you today." 3 days later, FBI agent Rebecca Hayes called. Asked Garrett to come to the federal building in Missoula. Bring all original documents related to Jack Wade's death. Garrett drove down with Frank Holloway. The old man had testified to federal investigators twice already, given detailed statements about witnessing Jack's murder, about the 20 years of silence that followed. Frank was quieter these days. The weight of truth-telling seemed to have aged him, but his eyes were clearer. "I should have done this when it happened," he said as they drove. "Should have stood up when it mattered." "You are standing up now. That counts." "Does it?" "Yes." Agent Hayes met them in a conference room on the 3rd floor. Spread photographs and documents across a long table. Photos from Jack Wade's crash site, brake line close-ups, maintenance records, insurance claims, corporate communications. "We have enough for murder charges," she said without preamble. Frank Holloway's testimony combined with the physical evidence and the geologist's recording establishes probable cause. "We also have evidence of conspiracy, fraud, and witness tampering." She pulled out another folder. "Titancore's corporate communications over the past 20 years. We subpoenaed their emails and internal documents. Found evidence they have been systematically targeting properties with mineral potential, threatening landowners, causing accidents, covering up." She looked at Garrett. "Your father was not the only one. We have identified 6 other deaths with similar patterns: brake failures, equipment malfunctions, falls from heights, all ruled accidental, all involving people who refused to sell land to Titancore." "Can you prove it?" "We are building the case. But yes, between your evidence and what we have gathered independently, we can make this stick." "What happens to the people who ordered my father's death?" Agent Hayes smiled grimly. "They go to prison for a very long time." That evening, Victor Brennan called Garrett directly. His voice was different now, less polished, more desperate. "Mr. Wade, I think we need to meet, face to face. No lawyers, just 2 people trying to find a solution. I do not think we have anything to discuss. Please, one meeting, tomorrow. Neutral location. Give me 1 hour of your time. Garrett met him at a coffee shop in Kalispell, public place, lots of witnesses. Brennan sat in a corner booth looking like he had not slept in days. The expensive suit was wrinkled, tie loosened. "Thank you for coming," Brennan said. "You have 50 minutes. Brennan ordered coffee he did not touch. "The FBI is tearing apart our company. Stock is down 20%. 3 executives have been arrested. Our board is in emergency session." He looked at Garrett. "We are facing criminal RICO charges. Corporate death penalty." "Good. I was not with the company when your father died. I did not order it. Did not know about it until the FBI started investigating." Brennan's voice was flat. "But I have spent 5 years covering for decisions made by men who are now in federal custody. That makes me complicit." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I am trying to save 1,200 jobs. Mining operations across Montana employ people who had nothing to do with what happened to your father. If Titancore collapses completely, they lose everything." Garrett sipped his coffee. "And you want me to help save the company that killed my father? I want you to consider that justice and destruction are not the same thing." Brennan leaned forward. "Punish the guilty. Send them to prison. Seize their assets. But do not burn down an entire industry and devastate communities just to satisfy rage." "What are you offering?" "Full settlement. $750,000 for your father's wrongful death. Formal acknowledgement of Titancore's role in his murder. Public apology. $100,000 per year into a scholarship fund in Rose Wade's name at Montana universities." He pulled out documents. "We relinquish all claims to mineral rights on your property. We acknowledge your ownership. We will support your licensing of Rose's extraction technology to the Department of Defense. And in exchange, you do not pursue complete corporate dissolution. You let some version of Titancore survive. Under new management, new oversight, strict environmental regulations, but surviving." Garrett set down his coffee. "You killed my father. You harassed my grandmother for 20 years. You tried to use my brother as leverage, and now you want mercy." "I want to minimize collateral damage." Brennan's voice was quiet. "Your grandmother spent 2 decades being angry, being right, being alone. Is that the life you want?" That night Garrett called a meeting at the Forge. Frank Holloway, Pastor Sullivan, Dr. Whitmore, Sarah Chen, Samuel Cross. Danny sat quietly in the corner listening. Garrett explained Brennan's offer, laid out the terms, asked for counsel. Pastor Sullivan spoke first. "I am a man of faith. I believe in justice, but I also believe in mercy. Brennan did not kill your father. Punishing innocent workers for the sins of executives who are already facing prison seems vindictive." Frank's voice was harder. "Titancore destroyed your family. Rose died alone because of them. They deserve to burn." Sarah Chen looked thoughtful. "From a journalist perspective, criminal convictions of executives is the real victory. Corporate restructuring under federal oversight might actually change industry practices. Complete destruction just creates a vacuum for another company to fill." Dr. Whitmore added his perspective. "The Department of Defense wants Rose's technology. If you license it to them instead of Titancore, you bypass the company entirely. You serve national security. You honor Rose's work. And you do not need Titancore for any of it." Samuel Cross was quiet. Then he said, "What would Rose want?" Garrett looked around the forge. At the anvil where his grandmother had worked for 50 years. At the tools hanging on the walls. At the hearth where fire had burned through decades of fighting and loss and stubborn refusal to surrender. "I do not know," he admitted. "Then maybe you should ask her," Samuel said. Later that night, alone in the underground laboratory, Garrett went through Rose's safe one more time, looking for something, anything, guidance. He found a USB drive taped to the bottom of the cache stack, so small he had missed it the first 3 times he had searched. A label in Rose's handwriting, for Garrett, watch after you have one. He plugged it into the computer, a video file, dated 4 months before Rose died. The video opened on Rose in the forge. She looked frail, thinner than he remembered from childhood. Gray hair pulled back, hands that shook slightly, but her eyes were clear. "Garrett," she said, "if you are watching this, you beat Titan Core. I am so proud of you." She sat on a stool near the anvil. Behind her, the forge fire burned low. "You are probably angry right now. Angry at them for what they did to your father, to me, to our family. That anger is justified, but I need to tell you something I learned too late." She paused, gathered her thoughts. "I spent 20 years angry. Anger kept me alive, gave me purpose, made me document everything, build this laboratory, perfect the extraction process. But anger also kept me alone, kept me from accepting help, kept me from enjoying what time I had left." Rose looked directly at the camera, at Garrett across time. "Your father did not die so you could destroy a company. He died trying to build something better, clean energy, American independence, security for his family. Honor him by finishing his work, not by burning down everything in rage." She picked up a hammer, the same hammer she had been holding when she died. "The forge is not about destruction, Garrett. It is about transformation. You take raw metal, broken pieces, and you heat them until they are soft enough to shape. Then you hammer them into something useful, something beautiful, something stronger than they were before." She struck the anvil once. The ring echoed through the video. "Do that with your life. Transform pain into purpose. Transform loss into legacy. Transform anger into something your father would be proud of." Rose set down the hammer, looked tired suddenly, very tired. "I love you, Garrett. I always have. I am sorry I could not be there for you and Danny, but I did the best I could with what I had. And I hope, when you find this, you will understand that everything I did was because I loved you." She smiled, sad and gentle and full of a grandmother's love that transcended distance and time. "Come home, finish the work. Be the man I always knew you would be." The video ended. Garrett sat in the darkness of the underground room for a long time, staring at the blank screen, hearing Rose's voice echo in his memory, feeling the weight of her words settle into his bones. He climbed the stairs, walked into the forge proper. The building was cold, fire long since dead. He loaded the hearth with coal, struck a match, fed the flames until they caught and grew. Orange light filled the room. Heat pushed back the cold. Danny appeared in the doorway. "Could not sleep," he said. "Me neither." They stood together watching the fire. Two brothers in a forge their grandmother built, carrying the weight of family history that stretched back through decades of work and loss and stubborn hope. "What are you going to do?" Danny asked. Garrett looked at the anvil, at the hammer Rose had used in her final video, at the forge that had survived arson attempts and condemnation notices and 20 years of corporate pressure. "I am going to finish what she started." The next morning, Garrett called Victor Brennan, agreed to settlement negotiations, but on his terms, at his location, in the forge. Brennan arrived with 2 lawyers. Garrett had Samuel Cross and Agent Rebecca Hayes as observers, Pastor Sullivan as witness, Frank Holloway as the voice of 20 years of silence finally broken. The terms took 6 hours to finalize. Titan Core would pay $750,000 for Jack Wade's wrongful death, would publicly acknowledge their role in his murder, would publish formal apologies in every newspaper that had covered the story, would fund the Rose Wade Memorial Scholarship at $100,000 per year in perpetuity, would establish the Jack Wade Geological Research Fund at Montana Tech, would submit to federal oversight of all mining operations for 10 years, would relinquish all claims to Wade property mineral rights, would support Garrett's licensing of Rose's extraction technology to the Department of Defense. In exchange, Garrett would not pursue complete corporate dissolution, would accept criminal prosecution of individual executives without demanding institutional death penalty. Victor Brennan signed first. His hand shook slightly. Garrett signed last. "It is done," Samuel Cross said. Brennan stood, extended his hand. Garrett looked at it, then shook. "I did not kill your father," Brennan said quietly, "but I am sorry for what my company did. I am sorry for all of it." "Sorry does not bring him back." "No, it does not." Brennan left. The lawyers followed. Agent Hayes gathered the documents. Pastor Sullivan approached Garrett. "You made the right choice." "Did I?" "Your grandmother did not spend 20 years building evidence just for revenge. She wanted justice. You got that. She wanted her technology to serve the country. You made that happen. She wanted her grandson safe. You have Danny." He put a hand on Garrett's shoulder. "Sometimes winning does not feel like victory, but it is." That evening, news broke across Montana and beyond. Titan Core Settlement acknowledges murder, pays millions to veterans' family. The headlines spread through local news, regional coverage, then national. CNN ran a segment on corporate accountability. The New York Times wrote about rare earth elements and national security. Forbes covered the technology licensing deal with the Department of Defense. Garrett's phone rang constantly. Reporters, lawyers, business offers. He ignored most of them. Focused instead on Danny, on teaching him the forge, on showing him Rose's notebooks, on telling him stories about their father and grandmother that had been buried under years of silence. Frank Holloway stopped by with groceries, stayed for dinner, told stories about Rose that made Danny laugh. Dr. Whitmore brought research students to the forge, began documenting Rose's process for academic publication, treated her work with the reverence it deserved. Sarah Chen won a regional journalism award for her Titan Core investigation, dedicated it to Rose Wade's memory. And slowly, carefully, Garrett began to breathe again. The nightmares came less frequently. The flashbacks faded. The forge fire stopped triggering memories of IEDs and started becoming just fire. 1 month after the settlement, Danny asked to try metalworking. Garrett showed him how to heat iron, how to hold the tongs, how to strike with the hammer so the metal moved where you wanted it to go. The boy's first piece was clumsy, uneven, a crude approximation of a horseshoe, but he made it himself, with his own hands, in the forge their grandmother built. Garrett hung it on the wall with all of Rose's perfect work, a reminder that everyone starts rough. That perfection comes through practice. That family is built through shared effort. That night, he read through Rose's journal one more time, found an entry from 10 years ago he had missed. February 19, 2015, anniversary of Jack's death. Lit a candle at St. Matthew's, prayed for peace, not just for him, for everyone who has been hurt by what happened. Anger is exhausting. Grief is exhausting. Maybe someday I will find rest. She never did, not in life, but Garrett could give her rest now, could finish her work, could transform her anger into something that served the living instead of haunting the dead. He closed the journal, looked around the underground laboratory, at years of research documented with scientific precision, at evidence of a life spent fighting alone, at proof that love persisted even when the world said it did not matter. "You can rest now, Grandma," he said to the empty room, to the walls that held her secrets, to the stone that kept her promises. "I have got it from here." The next morning, Garrett walked to the forge at dawn, built a fire, let it burn hot and clean. Then he picked up Rose's hammer and began to work, making something new from metal that had been broken, transforming raw material into purpose, forging a future from the fragments of the past. The hammer rang against the anvil, again and again. The sound carried across the valley, through the mountains, into the sky. The sound of iron remembering what it was made for. The sound of legacy honored and burden lifted. The sound of a family finally coming home. Winter released its grip on Montana slowly, grudgingly, like a fist unclenching one finger at a time. The snow that had blanketed the Wade property since November began to retreat in March, revealing brown grass and muddy earth and the promise of green beneath. Ice broke on the creek that ran along the eastern boundary. Water flowed again, cold and clear, carrying winter downstream. Garrett stood in the doorway of the forge at dawn, watching the sun rise over mountains that looked different now. Not because the mountains had changed, because he had. 6 months since the custody hearing. 6 months since the settlement with Titan Corps. 6 months of building something from the wreckage Rose had left behind. Danny appeared beside him, wearing a jacket too thin for the morning cold. He had grown 3 inches since coming to Montana. His voice was changing, cracking between registers when he got excited. He no longer chewed his thumbnail when he was nervous. "School today?" Garrett asked. "Half day, teacher conferences." Danny looked at the forge. "Can we work on the gate hinges this afternoon? If you finish your homework first." "Already done." "Then yes." They walked to the cabin together. Inside, the smell of coffee and wood smoke. Frank Holloway sat at the kitchen table with a mug and the Billings Gazette spread before him. The old man came by 3 mornings a week now, said he liked the company, said the ranch was too quiet since his wife passed 2 years ago. "Front page," Frank said, tapping the newspaper. "Montana Tech announces Wade Family Scholarship recipients. 5 students, geology and metallurgy programs." Garrett poured coffee, Reed over Frank's shoulder. 5 young people whose educations would be paid for by money that came from his father's murder and his grandmother's stubborn refusal to surrender. Justice transmuted into opportunity. Pain transformed into possibility. "Rose would be proud," Frank said quietly. "Yeah, she would." Danny ate breakfast quickly, grabbed his backpack, caught the school bus at the end of the long driveway. Garrett watched the yellow bus disappear around the bend, still felt a flutter of anxiety every time his brother left his sight, still checked his phone too often to make sure Danny was safe. But the anxiety was less than it had been. The hypervigilance was fading. The nightmares that used to wake him sweating and gasping came maybe once a week now instead of every night. Work helped, physical labor, fire and metal and creation. The Department of Defense had contracted him as a technical consultant for rare earth extraction, paid him to teach Rose's methodology to government scientists, paid him well enough that money was no longer something he worried about. The irony was not lost on him. Titan Corps had offered $18,000 for the property. Now he was making that much per month just explaining how his grandmother heated metal. He spent mornings in the forge, afternoons on video calls with DoD materials engineers, evenings teaching Danny the basics of metalwork, weekends helping Pastor Sullivan with church projects or Frank with ranch repairs. A life, simple and full. the kind of life Rose had wanted for him but never got to see. By April, the scholarship fund had distributed its first grants. 5 Montana students, most from small towns, all studying fields Rose had pioneered alone in her underground laboratory. The university invited Garrett to meet them. He drove to Butte on a Saturday. Montana Tech campus sprawled across a hillside, brick buildings and mining equipment displays, the bones of the state's industrial history preserved like fossils. The scholarship recipients waited in Dr. Whitmore's office. 3 young men, 2 young women, all with the eager nervousness of people meeting someone important. Garrett felt absurd. He was 23 years old. A year ago he had been sleeping on a cot in a VA hospital. Now college students were shaking his hand and thanking him for opportunities he had not created. Rose created them. He was just the inheritor. Dr. Whitmore made introductions. This is Michael Chen, studying advanced metallurgy. Sarah Blackfeet, geological engineering. Thomas Rivera, environmental chemistry. Jennifer Morrison, mining safety. And David Wells, rare earth element extraction. They asked questions about Rose, about the forge, about what it was like to discover decades of research hidden underground. Garrett answered as best he could, showed them photographs on his phone, the underground laboratory, Rose's notebooks, the spectrometer readings from his first successful extraction batch. David Wells, the rare earth student, leaned forward. Your grandmother did in a forge what takes industrial facilities millions of dollars of equipment. How? She understood that metal has memory, that it responds to how you treat it. She spent 50 years learning to listen. But the process is scientifically rigorous. The temperature controls, the chemical ratios, the crystallization timing. That is not intuition. That is engineering. Garrett smiled. Rose would say it is both. Science tells you what is possible. Intuition tells you when it is ready. After the meeting, Dr. Whitmore walked him to his truck. The students are calling her the Forge Alchemist. Academic papers are being written. Her methodology is revolutionizing rare earth extraction theory. She would have hated the attention. Probably, but she would have loved that her work mattered, that it outlived her. Garrett drove home through mountains turning green, pine trees thick with new growth, meadows spotted with wildflowers, the land remembering how to be alive. Danny was waiting when he got back, homework spread across the kitchen table, math worksheets and a book report on a novel about World War II. His grades had climbed from C's to A's and B's. Teachers said he was a different kid, focused, engaged, happy. How was Butte? Danny asked. Good, met the scholarship students, smart kids. Rose would have liked them. Do you think she is watching? Garrett sat down, picked up one of Danny's worksheets, checked the math. Yeah, I think she is. In May, Sarah Chen's book was published. Corporate Shadows, Titan Core, Murder, and the Fight for American Rare Earth Independence. It became a regional bestseller, made national news, was optioned for a documentary film. Sarah sent Garrett an advance copy with an inscription. This story belongs to Rose Wade and everyone who refuses to let power erase the powerless. Thank you for trusting me with it. The book was thorough, exhaustive. 7 suspicious deaths laid out in detail. Corporate documents showing systematic intimidation. Testimony from families who had lost land, lost livelihoods, lost loved ones. And at the center, Rose Wade's 20-year investigation documented with the precision of someone who knew the truth would only matter if it could be proven. Titan Core's remaining executives faced trial in federal court. 3 had already pled guilty. 2 were fighting charges. None of them would see freedom for decades. Victor Brennan, who had negotiated the settlement, was not charged. He had cooperated with investigators, testified against former colleagues, left the mining industry entirely. Last Garrett heard, Brennan was teaching business ethics at a community college in Oregon. Strange how justice worked. Not clean, not simple, just human beings trying to untangle webs of complicity and choice and consequence. The 6-month custody review came in June. Same courthouse, same Judge Rays, but this time the state's attorney had no objections. Garrett had completed parenting classes, maintained stable housing, demonstrated income. Danny was thriving in school and had a support network of adults who cared about him. Judge Rays reviewed the social worker's report, looked at Danny over her reading glasses. "Young man, are you happy living with your brother?" "Yes, ma'am." "Does he take good care of you?" "Yes, ma'am. He helps me with homework, teaches me metalwork, makes sure I eat vegetables." The courtroom chuckled. Even the judge smiled. "Do you want this arrangement to be permanent?" "Yes, ma'am, very much." Judge Rays set down the report. "Mr. Wade, I am making guardianship permanent effective immediately. Congratulations. You have done well." The gavel came down, final, binding, a family made legal by the only authority that mattered. Outside, Danny hugged Garrett hard. "We are really brothers now, like official." "We were always brothers," Garrett said. "Now the state agrees." Frank and Pastor Sullivan waited by the truck, congratulated them, suggested dinner at Stella's Diner to celebrate. They drove into Whitefish in a convoy. 2 trucks and Pastor Sullivan's ancient Buick, ordered too much food, ate until they were full and then kept eating because the moment was too good to end. That summer, the Montana governor's office called. They were planning a ceremony to honor Rose Wade's contributions to rare earth research and economic development. Would Garrett and Danny attend? The ceremony was scheduled for August 15th, 1 year and 2 days after Garrett had first arrived at the homestead. The location was the Wade property itself, the forge where Rose had worked, the land she had protected. Crews arrived a week early to prepare, set up a tent in case of rain, brought chairs for 200 guests, installed a temporary sound system, built a platform near the forge building. And they brought the monument. Bronze statue, 7 feet tall, Rose Wade standing at an anvil, hammer raised, face set with determination. The sculptor had worked from photographs, had captured something essential, not just her features but her spirit, the stubbornness, the strength, the refusal to break. The plaque at the base read, Rose Eleanor Wade, 1947 to 2022, Master Blacksmith, Innovator, Matriarch. She forged more than metal. She forged a legacy that will endure long after the mountains wear down. Garrett stood looking at it the night before the ceremony. Bronze rose forever frozen in the moment before the hammer struck, creating, building, refusing to surrender. Danny came and stood beside him. "Do you think it looks like her?" "Yeah, it does. I wish I remembered her better. I was only 2 when they took us away." "I will tell you stories, every one I remember, and Frank has more. And there are people all over Montana who knew her. We will keep her alive in the telling." The morning of the ceremony dawned clear and warm, summer in Montana at its finest. Blue sky stretching forever, mountains sharp against the horizon, air that tasted clean. People began arriving at 9. Veterans from the VFW wearing dress uniforms, church members from St. Matthews, ranchers who Rose had made horseshoes for, students from Montana Tech, reporters, federal officials. The governor arrived at 10. A woman in her late 50s who had won election on promises of economic development and environmental protection. She shook Garrett's hand, told him Montana was proud of what his family had accomplished. Senator Collins came from Washington, gave a speech about national security and American innovation and the importance of rare earth independence, thanked Rose Wade posthumously for her service to the country. Admiral Thompson attended in full dress uniform, medals covering his chest, spoke about sacrifice and duty and the quiet heroes who serve without recognition, saluted the bronze statue. But the moment that mattered most came when Frank Holloway took the microphone. The old man stood before 200 people and told the truth he should have told 40 years ago, about witnessing Jack Wade's murder, about staying silent out of fear, about the 20 years Rose spent fighting alone while he watched from a distance. "I was a coward," Frank said, his voice steady despite the weight of confession. "I let fear keep me quiet while a good man's death was covered up, while Rose lost everything trying to get justice. I will regret that silence until the day I die." He looked at the bronze statue, but Rose never gave up, even when everyone told her to, even when fighting cost her everything. She kept documenting, kept researching, kept believing the truth would matter. Frank's voice broke, and she was right, the truth did matter. Justice came late, but it came. He stepped down from the platform, walked to the statue, placed his hand on the bronze anvil, stood there for a long moment with his head bowed. Pastor Sullivan spoke next, about faith and perseverance and community, about how Rose had helped dozens of families when they were struggling, about how she never asked for anything in return, about how love looked like bringing casseroles and paying medical bills and showing up when no one else would. Dr. Whitmore presented the academic perspective, explained Rose's extraction methodology in terms the audience could understand, compared her to Marie Curie and other self-taught scientists who changed their fields, announced that Montana Tech was establishing the Rose Wade Center for Sustainable Mining Research. Then it was Garrett's turn. He had written a speech, practiced it, but standing at the microphone with 200 people watching and the bronze statue of his grandmother behind him, the prepared words felt wrong. So he spoke from the heart. "My grandmother could not raise me. Courts said she was too old, too sick, too poor. Maybe they were right about some of that, but they were wrong about what mattered." He looked at Danny sitting in the front row. Rose spent 20 years watching her grandsons from a distance, following our lives, documenting our achievements, praying for our safety. She wrote us letters she never sent because the system said contact would be harmful. Garrett's voice strengthened. She died believing she had failed, believing she had lost everything, believing her work did not matter. He gestured to the crowd. The governor, the senator, the students, the veterans, she was wrong. Her work changed an industry. Her fight exposed corruption. Her love brought a family back together. He touched the bronze statue, cold metal warmed by summer sun. "This is not just a monument to a blacksmith. It is proof that ordinary people can stand against power and win. That persistence matters. That love endures even when the world says it does not." He stepped back from the microphone. The crowd stood. Applause rolled across the clearing like thunder. After the ceremony, people lined up to meet Garrett and Danny, to shake hands, to share stories about Rose. A rancher from Kalispell told about how Rose made emergency horseshoes at midnight when his prize stallion threw a shoe before a show. A woman from Whitefish remembered Rose teaching her to weld when no one else would take on a female apprentice. An old miner recalled Rose fixing his truck for free when he was laid off and could not afford a mechanic. Stories, dozens of them, fragments of a life larger than Garrett had known. As the sun set and the crowd dispersed, only family remained. Frank and Pastor Sullivan and their families, Dr. Whitmore, Sarah Chen, Samuel Cross, the people who had fought beside them. They gathered in the forge. Garrett built a fire in the hearth. The old building filled with warmth and light. Shadows danced on walls that had witnessed 50 years of Rose's work. Frank raised a glass of whiskey to Rose Wade, who taught us that stubbornness is a virtue when you are fighting for what is right. They drank, talked late into the night, stories and laughter and comfortable silence, the kind of evening Rose would have loved. When everyone had left, Garrett and Danny remained, the fire burning low, the forge quiet except for the crackle of coals. Danny picked up a hammer, the one Rose had used most often, the handle worn smooth by her hands. "Teach me something," he said. So Garrett did, showed him how to heat a piece of iron, how to read the color, how to strike so the metal moved instead of just denting, how to quench at the right moment so the metal hardened without cracking. Danny's piece was rough, uneven, but it was his, made by his own effort in their grandmother's forge. Garrett hung it on the wall, added it to the collection of work that spanned generations: Rose's perfect horseshoes, Jack's geological samples in the underground lab, Garrett's early attempts from 6 months ago, and now Danny's first piece. A family working metal, building something that would last. Fall came with gold aspens and cold mornings. The Department of Defense awarded contracts to 3 Montana mining companies to use Rose's extraction methodology. 400 jobs created across the state. American rare earth production increased 12% in the first year. Chinese imports decreased. National security experts called it a strategic victory. Rose Wade's name appeared in congressional testimony about critical mineral independence. She had died alone in a forge. Now senators spoke her name in the Capitol. The scholarship fund grew. More students, more opportunities, more young people studying geology and metallurgy and sustainable mining because Rose had made it possible. Titan Corp underwent restructuring, new leadership, federal oversight, environmental regulations strictly enforced. The company still existed, but it was smaller, chastened, permanently marked by what it had done. Sometimes justice looked like that. Not destruction but transformation. Not revenge but accountability. Winter returned. Snow blanketed the property again, but this time the cabin was warm, electricity flowed, water ran, firewood was stacked high. Danny turned 12 in December. Garrett threw him a party at the cabin. Pastor Sullivan's family came. Frank brought a cake his daughter had made. Dr. Whitmore gave Danny a geology textbook. Sarah Chen sent a signed copy of her book with an inscription for Danny about carrying forward his grandmother's legacy. They sang happy birthday around the kitchen table, the same table where Rose had eaten alone for so many years, now filled with people, with noise, with life. That night after everyone left, Garrett walked to the forge. The building stood dark against the snow. He went inside, did not light the fire, just sat on the stool near the anvil. Thought about the year that had passed, the battles fought and won, the family reunited, the legacy secured. Thought about Rose, about whether she knew, whether she could see what her work had become. "I hope you are proud," he said to the darkness, to the walls that held her memory, to the anvil that bore the marks of 10,000 hammer strikes. "We are home, we are together, and we are finishing what you started." The forge was silent, but it felt like the silence of peace, not emptiness but rest. Spring came again, the cycle completing. Danny helped with the garden Garrett planted behind the cabin, vegetables and herbs, things that would grow and be harvested and sustain them. They worked the forge together now, Garrett teaching, Danny learning, the hammer passing from one generation to the next. On the anniversary of Garrett's first arrival in Montana, They walked to the monument. The bronze statue weathered slightly by a year of mountain weather, moss beginning to grow on the north side of the base, the natural process of becoming part of the landscape. "Think she would have liked it?" Danny asked. Garrett looked at the statue, at bronze Rose forever working, forever creating, forever refusing to quit. She would have said it was too much fuss, that her work should speak for itself, that monuments are for dead people and she was too busy to be dead. Danny laughed. "Sounds like her." "Yeah, it does." They stood in silence, two brothers, two survivors, two inheritors of a legacy they were only beginning to understand. Then they walked back to the forge. Inside, Garrett loaded coal into the hearth, struck a match, fed the fire until it caught. Danny worked the bellows. Flames rose hot and clean. Garrett pulled out the commission they had been working on, a set of custom gate hinges for the entrance to the new Rose Wade Center at Montana Tech. Heavy pieces, requiring precision and strength and patience. They worked together, heating the metal, hammering it into shape, the rhythm ancient and familiar, the same rhythm blacksmiths had followed for thousands of years. Danny held the piece with tongs while Garrett hammered. Then they switched. Garrett held while Danny struck, learning, growing, becoming. The metal glowed orange. Sparks flew with each impact. The ring of hammer on anvil echoed through the building. Outside, winter was finally releasing its hold. Snow melting, ice breaking, water flowing again, the land remembering how to live. Inside the forge, two brothers worked, building something from raw material, creating something that would last. The hammer rang, again and again. The sound of iron remembering its purpose. The sound of legacy continuing. The sound of a family that refused to be broken. Garrett paused, set down the hammer, looked at Danny, at this boy who had survived the system that destroyed them, who had come home, who was learning the craft their grandmother mastered. "You are doing good work," he said. Danny smiled. Grandma would be proud. Yeah, she would. They returned to the metal, to the fire, to the work that connected them across generations. And somewhere in the space between memory and presence, Rose Wade watched. Not gone, just transformed, woven into the land and the forge and the hands of her grandsons shaping metal into purpose. The forge she built stood eternal, the legacy she forged burned bright. And the hammer she held until her last breath rang on. In the hands of those who remembered. In the hearts of those who refused to forget. In the iron that held the heat of creation, and the weight of love that transcended time and loss, and every attempt to erase it. The forge she built. The family she saved. The future she made possible. All of it alive, all of it enduring. All of it forged in fire and tempered in truth, and hammered into something stronger than steel. Something that would last as long as mountains stood and rivers flowed, and people needed reminding that ordinary stubbornness in service of extraordinary love could change the world. Rose Wade knew that. And now her grandsons knew it too. The hammer rang. The fire burned. The work continued. And the forge she built stood ready. Always ready. For whatever came next.